The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. One of the scribes, when he came forward and heard them disputing, and saw how well Jesus had answered the Sadducees, asked him, "Which is the first of all the commandments?" Jesus replied, "The first is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." The scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You are right in saying, He is the one, and there is no other than He, and to love Him with all your heart, and with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, is worth more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he answered with understanding, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And no one dared to ask him any more questions. This is the good news of our salvation. We have mentioned that in the Mosaic Law, according to the tradition of the rabbis, there were over 613 statutes that had to be implemented. And the rabbis, as far as I know, didn't prioritize them because they thought every one of these statutes, stipulations, came from God. Therefore, they were to be implemented. How they were to be implemented was according to the lawyers or the rabbis, and the people would come and ask their wisdom on how to put these 613 statutes into practice. But this scribe in today's gospel perhaps was trying to trip Jesus up, as they did on so many times, because Jesus was not a member of their group. He had no training specifically in the law. So he learned the law from the culture and from discussions in the synagogues, but without a professional academic formation. But he answered so beautifully when asked this difficult question: which of the 613 commandments is the greatest? And he quoted from this beautiful passage in the book of Deuteronomy. But the second part that he put into the question and answer comes from the book of Leviticus, when Leviticus was talking about how we are to live in community, or the Jews were in their own culture and in their own tradition. And one was to love your neighbor as yourself. Don't fight or have conflicts with your neighbor. And in order to have peace, development, and joy and happiness in the community. But of course, in the Gospel of St. Luke, we have a continuation. And it's not the praise of the scribe as Jesus saw him understand completely what Jesus was teaching and accepted. But the Gospel of St. Luke, the one questioning Jesus, says, "And who is my neighbor that I must love as myself?" And perhaps you remember the completely surprising answer to Jesus. It was a Samaritan, not one living in the same compound or settlement, but a foreigner who was hated and who hated the Jews. The conflict that we see in the Middle East between the Palestinians and the Israelis, or between factions in the different wars that are going on in the Middle East because of political reasons or wishing for democracy or dictatorship. They were a Jew and a Samaritan. And the Samaritan came and showed concern because he recognized this was another human being who needed his help to save his life. It is interesting that Jesus, in telling this story, said there were two Jews who passed their fellow Jew on the road and left him alone. And so Jesus is telling us we must love God and love our neighbor. But actually, this is the Ten Commandments. The first three are our love of God, and the second 7 are love of the members of our community. So if we want to love God, we have to love our neighbor. If we want to love our neighbor, we have to love God. So Jesus was doing the will of the Father when he gave his life for us.